Funding for this program was provided in part by the Division of Continuing Education at Brigham Young University.
We welcome you to another roundtable discussion of the Doctrine and Covenants. I'm Matthew Richardson, Associate Dean of Religious Education at Brigham Young University. I'm joined today with my colleagues from the Department of Church History and Doctrine, also from Brigham Young University. Seated across the table from me is Alex Baugh. Welcome, Alex. It's nice to have you here. Jerry Perkins.
Hi, Matt.
And Craig Ostler. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you.
It's nice to have you here today, brethren. We will start our study beginning in section 114. This is in April. We're starting at least in April of 1838, and we see that we're in Missouri. Alex, you know a little bit about Missouri, I think. Maybe it would be wise if you catch us up what's happening in Missouri in 1838, so we have a good framework to look through these sections we'll be studying.
You want to open that door to him?
Absolutely.
Well, we've actually been in Missouri a long time.
That's right.
But as far as the prophet being with the saints in Missouri, he hasn't been there long. He arrived March 14th. He's only been there a month. He has, of course, visited throughout the years, a number of occasions, but he's finally moved because of the Kirtland apostasy. And I think a lot of that apostasy followed him right to far west. The date of this revelation is April 17th, and I think it's significant. Guess who's excommunicated just 6 days before? His dear friend, an associate, Oliver Cowdery.
And the day following, David Whitmer.
And then the 13th, we have David Whitmer.
Family, actually. It wasn't just David. The entire family goes.
David Whitmer on the 13th, Lyman Johnson on the 13th. There's an apostle. David Whitmer's the president of the church in Missouri, or had been, I should say. And these are still trying times in far west as, again, some of that Kirtland apostasy comes with it. And these couldn't be real happy days for Joseph to see some of these closest associates renege on their testimony in terms of their commitment to the church. Maybe not their testimony as terms of witnesses, but to see them leave the church has to be very frustrating for Joseph. But the revelation is given to a wonderful and faithful individual, labeled by his associates as Captain Fear Not, David Patton, a man who is courageous to a fault. And it's a short revelation, only 2 verses, but it does have a little bit of an illusion of what's going to take place.
That's exactly right. And considering the historical framework which you've given, where we've been losing individuals, Oliver Cowdery, the Whitmer family, members of the Quorum of the 12, including John Boynton from 1837, so we already have a vacancy there. It almost feels, when one's reading through the history of this, is, can we ebb the tide here? Is there any way that is it just going to keep on rolling because we're losing heavy hitters, so to speak, individuals there? And I've always loved this little section just for the ray of light that you're mentioning with David W. Patton but not all. Not all are leaving, and wonderful elements there of buoyancy within the church, as well as you're mentioning of what's to come, is we are losing and it's not over.
Verse 2, inasmuch as, for verily thus saith the Lord, that inasmuch as there are those among you who deny my name, others shall be planted in their stead. We're all replaceable.
Yeah.
Oliver's has been a wonderful servant, as has the others, but we're all replaceable in this kingdom.
You know, and this is interesting, and I think that this might be worthy in mentioning. It says, if we keep reading in verse 2, others shall be planted in their stead and receive their bishopric. I think that might cause some confusion to some, saying, wait, what are we talking about? We just mentioned individuals who are assistants president of the church. We have, of the 3 witnesses, members of the Quorum of the 12. Well, where does this bishopric part come in?
It really means any office in the priesthood. And so you, as Alex stated, you have members of the First Presidency being lost. You have members of the Quorum of the 12, 70s being lost, the 3 witnesses being lost. And as Alex stated, the idea here is the Lord says, this church, this gospel will function. We would love to have you continue with us, but it will function without you.
We've seen this happen earlier in the book of Acts when Peter's referring to Judas's place among the 12. He refers to it as a bishopric. It comes from a Greek word, episkope, and it means overseers, or we'd call it office. And it's just saying, I think we could substitute the word office. They'll receive their office, which
or ministerial appointment, or whatever they're
that's all
going to serve in.
That's right. That's right. And I think that becomes very important and you mentioned it, and it was kind of a biting statement because it hurts a little bit, is we're all replaceable. And regardless of those office, it's true. They will be, and I love the wording in verse 2, shall be planted in their stead. I don't know. I just think that's such a charming notion, being planted within that office. And I guess I don't want to draw too much on this, but sometimes those who are planted in these offices are seedlings. We expect individuals to be without fault and perfect, and yet the Lord constantly plants someone within an office for them to fulfill and magnify that approach. It's wonderful wording.
However, as we discuss those that have fallen to the wayside, how Joseph must have appreciated the Heber C. Kimballs and the Brigham Youngs, the Hiram Smiths and the David Pattons.
No doubt.
David Patton had comments such as, I have weapons you know not of, and they were given me of God, for he gives me all the power that I have. To his wife upon his death, he said, of all the things you do not deny the faith. And so even though we're saying people are easily replaced, how sweet for Joseph to have a David W. Patton or a Heber C. Kimball who were stalwarts.
And stalwart they were, Alex.
Yeah, well, and he is reassured, of course, in Liberty Jail, thy friends do stand by thee.
That's right.
There's still people there who'll remain true and faithful.
And I'm not going to jump ahead here. I'll hold my enthusiasm for what's coming down the pipeline, but those that will be planted in the stead of the quorum of the 12, you have some pretty interesting stalwarts coming in that group that is going to come forth.
And again, Craig has mentioned often that the Lord has a plan, and you can see in these verses, or in these sections, as these stalwarts fall by the wayside, the Lord has a plan. The mission to England, great new individuals who will soon be eventually presidents of the church.
That's right. That's right.
We probably should mention that, again, Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde are, at this present time, in England.
That's right.
Promulgating the gospel. There's no doubt been communication that they're doing pretty good. And the expectation of the Lord is for David Patton and the rest of the 12, that's what he mentions in verse 1, make plans. We're going to have the entire 12 go over there in a big-time missionary push effort.
And so you have David W. Patton looking forward to this experience, but doesn't have the opportunity.
Well, unfortunately, of course, he's a victim of the Missouri persecutions, and he is killed in October of 1838. So he does not live to fulfill the revelation, but again, others were planted in his stead, not because of his apostasy,
That's
but
right.
certainly because...
and faithful to the mission which he was called.
Sure.
What a wonderful notion. Well, let's go to section 115. We come to 115. Jerry, why don't you frame this one for us, and then we'll just jump into the text.
This is a revelation that's addressed to the church, especially to the first presidency and the presiding bishopric, and it's the will of God regarding Far West and the establishment of Zion, a place of gathering.
Okay. Alex, thoughts?
Very, very significant. He's, of course, outlining why Far West is so important and why now Far West is the main place of gathering. We've gathered to Fayette, Colesville, Manchester, Palmyra. We've gathered to Kirtland area. We've gathered to Independence. We've gathered to Clay County. But now the main place of gathering is the new church headquarters, Far West. And so for the next several months, Far West will be the main principal place of gathering. And then he tells them, of course, why we need to gather.
That's right.
Notice in verse number 1 who the first presidency now is, which is interesting.
Why don't you read that, Jerry?
Verily, thus saith the Lord unto you, my servant Joseph Smith Jr., and my servant Sidney Rigdon, and also my servant Hiram Smith, and your counselors who are and shall be appointed hereafter. So Frederick G. Williams has fallen to the wayside. Hiram Smith now has this calling. Verse number 2 gives an indication that this revelation is also to the presiding bishopric, mentioning
Before you go too
Edward
far,
Partridge.
Verse 1's interesting because the saints are going to be introduced to so many new ideas, and that is there are counselors.
That's right.
Additional counselors.
Sometimes called assistant counselors, you know.
That's how they refer to them. And I noticed...
John Smith,
Yeah,
Hiram Smith,
he's
Joseph Smith Sr.
which is exactly what we've seen continued in the kingdom when it was needed, where there's an additional counselor to
Thorpe
the
B.
first
Isaacson.
presidency.
Well, we saw that with Joseph Smith's presidency, Brigham Young's presidency, and then we go all the way to David O. McKay's presidency, where we have additional counselors. And then, of course, the last one that we've had would have been Spencer W. Kimball's presidency, with an additional counselor was Gordon B. Hinckley at that time. So, yeah,
And
that's a
there'll
good
be
point.
some in the future, too.
Yeah, and I like what you brought out because this is important. As needs be to fit the kingdom for its cause, which is a great experience.
The other thing, too, that's taught here, of course, the name of the church, as we use it today in verse 4 or 3 and 4, is officially given. But I like that the place of stakes, I think the legacy of Far West is that we come to understand again the place of stakes throughout the church.
Yes.
Before we dismiss verse 4, could I make comment on the name of the church?
Sure.
I think it's interesting. It is the Church of Jesus Christ, but there is a manifestation here of how much the Lord trusts us. It is also the Church of the Latter-day Saints. And there is a tremendous unity here. Doctrine and Covenants section 76 talks about that before you can be a member of the Church of the Firstborn, which is indicative of celestial or exalted life, you must first be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ. And this church is the place of refuge, the place of instruction, the place of growth, and so this name of the church says, this is Jesus' church. He's in charge. But he then delegates to the saints this same church, and in the process of serving, we have the opportunity of becoming like Christ. And I think it's a magnificent compliment to us.
History of the name of the church?
Very significant, I think. Of course, in the early period of the church, it was essentially known as the Church of Christ. The day of organization had some little bit of a variance, but by 1834, they're calling it the Church of the Latter-day Saints. And the Lord, by 1838, says, all right, here's what it's going to be. Verily thus saith the Lord, even the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints. And that brings us in line with 3rd Nephi 27, when the Lord says, howbeit my church, save it be called in my name. And of course has to be built upon the principles of the gospel. But very important name, the church.
Well, you bring up an interesting part there is going from 3rd Nephi and then a little bit of a correction. Let me remind you, and then even after we've established this here in section 115, it's interesting in 2002, the directive from the church saying, please let us not forget, this is the Church of Jesus Christ. Even to the extent of making sure that we emphasize both visually and in our speech that this is the Savior's church and that we are part of that unification as Latter-day Saints.
In verse number 5, verily I say unto you, arise and shine forth, that thy light may be a standard for the nations. I think he's speaking to the saints here. We talked on another half-hour period of time that Joseph was an ensign, and now he is saying that Joseph was an ensign of gathering, that the gospel that he would restore, that people would gather to this magnificent restoration. Now he is saying that the saints themselves, the members of the church, are to be a standard for nations, and that we are to be an ensign ourselves, which again, I think in these two verses we're being compared first to Christ, and then in my opinion, we're also being compared to the prophet Joseph.
And then we come to an interesting part is as we become part of that, the question might arise is, do I have individually the strength to be able to stand as the ensign? And this is where, Craig, I think you're bringing up something that's so powerful is in verse 6 there is, well, how do we help the individuals? How do we help the church, or are all to be gathered in the one single location in the land of Zion? But there it says that for a defense, and in verse 6, and for a refuge from the storm and from the wrath when it shall be poured out without mixture upon the whole earth. Where do we stand? It says the stakes of Zion. Isn't that an interesting concept?
Where do we find security today? Well, certainly our homes, but it's the ecclesiastical unit of the stakes where we find our leadership, our direction, our local direction where we need to be and what we need to be doing. The stakes are vital to the kingdom.
No doubt.
And
the concept of Zion, the Lord introduces it all the way back in the early sections, and he gives us a forewarning. This is my goal. The pure in heart. Joseph Smith states we ought to have the building of Zion as our greatest object. And then he states in the teachings of the prophet Joseph, page 71, without Zion, without a place of deliverance, we must fall. If we are not sanctified and gathered to the places the Lord has appointed, we must fall. we cannot stand. Now, what are the places that the Lord has appointed? They're varied. One is to the stakes. Another is to that purity of heart. And there is section after section after section where the Lord is saying there will only, right here, verse 6, this location of Zion will be a defense and a refuge from the storm. And so he's saying, I think he's saying to us today, the world now is such a place that we must gather to the places the Lord has assigned.
And be not moved.
Yeah.
You know, Alex, you brought up a really good point about the shifting locations as we see the history of the church from the very beginning to the present time, where we're here in 1838. And every time we gather the people together and start to build the construct of Zion, and we see this in this section as well, there is always something that they will establish. So, okay, now we're going to gather the people together, and we see that in verse 7. Let the city of far west be consecrated unto me, and be called, it should be called the most holy, for the ground which you stand is holy. Verse 8, therefore I command you to build a house unto me for the gathering together of my saints, that they may worship me. It seems wherever you find Zion, you're going to find a house of the Lord.
Not only do you find the house of the Lord, but in the middle of Kirtland, the Lord says, we will begin building Kirtland Stake at the Lord's house. Brigham Young says, and this is where we will build the temple to our God. And so it's the very heart of Zion.
No pun intended, Alex.
It's significant, I think, that even before Joseph arrived in Far West, they'd started the temple. On July 3rd, 1837, a group of men and boys, Mormon men and boys, excavated the site for the temple to a depth of 5 feet, using scrapers and teams and picks and axes and shovels. And in November, Joseph comes down and sees this excavation and goes, now you got to hold off on this. The Lord hasn't revealed that we should build this yet. And then, of course, now he's here, and here's the revelation saying, go forth. And again, verse 8, therefore I command you to build a house unto me for the gathering together of my saints, that they may worship me. And let there be a beginning of this work and a foundation and a preparatory work this following summer. And let the beginning, we could say the dedication, be made on the 4th day of July next. 4th of July, coming up, dedicate this spot. And that's indeed what they did. And then he says, and in 1 year from this day, verse 11, that's April 26th, 1839, let them recommence laying the foundation of my house, which we'll note, of course, they indeed did recommence laying the foundation of the temple there. So the point is, he's just giving a little timetable here. I've now authorized you to go ahead and work towards that effort. But I think it's significant. They'd gone ahead. Joseph told them to wait. Now here comes the revelation. And they didn't do a lot, but at least the Lord's giving him some direction here as to kind of a little more of a timetable.
I think it's interesting in verse 13. I've often thought about one of these nice little personal touches. Verily I say unto you, let not my servant Joseph, neither my servant Sidney, neither my servant Hiram get in debt any more for the building of my house unto my name. Reminiscent of things of past. It's interesting the Lord is still mindful of that and saying, now we're moving forward, but I'm still mindful of where we have been and giving good counsel and also reminding that, I'm aware.
Matt, this temple was a little bit bigger than Kirtland. It was excavated, and it's 110 feet long by 80 feet wide. Kirtland was 59 by 79, so it's a little bit bigger. It's Sidney Rigdon's son who told us that the design was similar to that of Kirtland. But I think there might have been some additional details that we may not have known about. For example, in July of this year, that same time, Joseph Smith writes a kind of a question-answer series in Far West saying that he believes it's now possible for a man in the flesh, a righteous man in the flesh, to perform a proxy baptism for a deceased relative. So Joseph's already starting to formulate some of these principles of temple worship, which they've not been doing. So perhaps the pattern, verse 14, 15, and 16, may have been a little bit different than the Kirtland temple, because Joseph's the keys are now restored in terms of temple work, and maybe Joseph has a little bit of a different concept concerning how this temple will be built versus it's going to be like Kirtland, but maybe there'll be some changes. And of course, we he does implement those changes in Nauvoo.
But wouldn't that make sense in the concept of line upon line, precept upon precept is where we're having an unfolding of, and so that would fall perfectly in line of the unfolding of these principles. Anything else that we look at here in the closing verses? We're reminded again in verse 17 is that the city of Far West should be built up speedily by the gathering of the saints and the stakes that would be in the regions round about. Any other thoughts, Alex?
Well, I think we have to say the saints fulfilled that injunction. Far West eventually became the largest settlement in northern Missouri, frontier settlement. I think we sometimes estimate it was about 5,000. I think that's probably, we have to extend that out a little ways, but Far West indeed became the principal place of gathering. He does say in verse 18, and also that other places should be appointed for stakes. And of course, where's that next stake? Adam on down. They're going to go up into Daviess County and form one there. So I'm just thinking here that the saints obviously took the injunction to heart. They did build it up. Far West certainly became a significant place in LDS church history. Sadly, you go there today and go on Route D, isn't it, Craig? And just nothing there. You can see the total abandonment of the once holy and sacred place where this wonderful community once lived and existed.
Thank you, Alex. You bring a good segue of bringing up to the next stakes, which is Adam on Diamond, which brings us to section 116, received in May of 1838. Craig, why don't you give us a background on this one? There aren't very many words in this section at all, one single verse.
37 words.
There we go. Thank you. And yet there is so much here as far as background, significance. And so why don't you frame this for us, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. The revelation itself comes from the personal journal of the prophet Joseph Smith when he visits that area with several of the brethren, and it is mentioned, it is known as Spring Hill. They spend some time in setting up what's going to be taking place there. Lyman White already lives in the area and has given the name of Tower Hill because he thinks he's found the remnants of some old Nephite towers, he reports it. But Joseph then, he says, no, there's something much more significant to what's happening here. And that's basically the background. We know that there was a temple that was going to be built there. We have no idea where it was going to be. We just know that was, people had mentioned that was taking place. And so, but I think more important than that is just the message that comes in those few short words. I think I've read this section many times to keep my goal of reading a section a night.
Spring Hill was the general region known as by the Missourians as this area. And Lyman White is the key figure there. And Joseph is on this fact-finding mission. He's going up there to try to find other places of Mormon settlement and stops by and sees Brother White. But again, I think after this point, when they recognize the significance of this place anciently and in terms of the modern context, it takes on added meaning to that power of 37 verses.
Well, or 37 words. We come
37 words, yeah.
Spring Hill is named by the Lord Adam on Diamond. Let's just break this apart as we go. Significance of the naming then when they start to realize the significance. And it says here, because it is the place where Adam shall come to visit his people. Two concepts there.
As you say, Orson Pratt at least reported that Joseph had explained some of the meaning of the name. He said that Adamonde had to do with the place that Adam dwelt.
Mm-hmm. And Ondai is dwelling.
Yeah, dwelling. And Ammon is the name, in the language of Adam, of God. And he gave it a rendition. It was the valley of God, or dwelling of God, where Adam dwelt. And it was kind of an interesting part. But I think more important is it doesn't say it's named Adamonde Ammon because this is where Adam lived. This is Adamonde Ammon because it's where Adam is going to visit. Yeah. It's a futuristic title.
Yeah. Yeah, and that becomes important because that brings us to the next segment of that is, well, what is going to happen there? Adam shall come to visit. So what are we talking about here and how do we frame that?
If you want, when Joseph actually taught about this, I thought it was interesting. He said that the time would come before Christ appears into the world that Adam, who is identified here as the Ancient of Days, would come and sit with his children. Joseph said that Adam will call his children together, hold a council with them to prepare for the coming of the Son of Man. Something future we're looking forward to. And then he, Adam, is the father of the human family, presides over the spirits of all men, and all that have had keys must stand before him in this grand council. And he says, but the Son of Man stands before him, referring to Adam, and there's given unto him, referring, I think, this time to Christ, glory and dominion. Adam delivers up his stewardship to Christ. That which was delivered to him as holding the keys of the universe, but he retains his standing as head of the human family. And we've been to Adam on Diamond too. I look forward to a future day doctrinally of when dispensations are merged together under one head. I mean, we just talked about stakes, and we know everyone has their stake president. We divide the church today geographically. But what do you do when you have generations, people who lived on the earth at different time, coming back to prepare for the millennium? You have to know who the head's going to be and who's going to be presiding, and Adam will preside under the direction of Christ
And that's
in that
important.
time period.
Under that direction of Christ. So we don't remove Christ from this at all. There's a stewardship reporting back to the head.
27th section of the Doctrine and Covenants gives an indication there will be a great sacrament meeting, and the section goes through individuals who are going to be at that sacrament meeting. The sacrament meeting is a preparatory meeting for the coming of Jesus the Christ. It's like a prayer meeting prior to a sacrament meeting, but individuals will come and they will give keys. They have to give a reporting of their dispensations. And the individuals who will be there will be dispensation heads. But in the 27th section, it says all of those Eliases who had responsibility in the restoration, who restored keys, they will also be at this meeting to give an account of the restoration, account of their keys. So this magnificent meeting is designed to prepare for the second coming of Jesus the Christ.
And yet in section 27, the sacrament meeting is held with Jesus
Right.
Christ. And so if it has reference to Adam on Diamond, which there's no connection given in section 27, but it could be, it appears that the main purpose is simply to partake of the sacrament with the Savior. But more important is the preparation. This is a time that we look forward to prepare us for Christ's second coming.
Well, if you think about what we've covered today, when we look at from section 114 on the note that you're saying, this is a time for preparation. The Lord preparing that for those who will be planted in the stead of those who have either apostatized or will lose their life, etc. We see the notion of setting up in Far West the temple site, establishing the name of Christ. All these in preparation to go forth and culminating in really section 116 there, in a wonderful time where Christ shall be the supreme officer. Thank you for your insights and your help in understanding these. It's at least given us something to build upon and go from there.
Visit our website to find out more about the Doctrine and Covenants. Go to byubroadcasting.org. Funding for this program was provided in part by the Division of Continuing Education at Brigham Young University.